Hey guys, Fox here. The 2024 United Football League Draft has officially concluded, and it is time to start recapping what each team did in the draft. Remember, this draft essentially had just players who were eligible in the 2024 NFL Draft, but weren't selected. They can be currently on NFL rosters, as this is essentially a players' rights draft, much like the 2023 USFL College Draft, for those of you who were around the channel when that came out. So essentially, some of these players might end up coming and playing next year, some might be coming and playing in a couple years, and some might never play in this league. But if they do decide to go to the UFL, they will be required to play for the team that selected them. So we're going to be starting off with the Memphis Showboats today, as we're going to be doing these in order from the order of the draft. I'm going to be uploading probably 2 of these a day, so if you're not already and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. And without further ado, let's get started with the first overall pick of the entire 2024 UFL College Draft, Jason Bean, quarterback out of Kansas. This was a shocker. Look, Bean is somebody who had to come in and fill time. Kansas had some really just poor luck with their QBs, in terms of injuries over the past couple of years. And he was one of those guys that came in and did a very serviceable job. Of course, in 2023, he had a really solid 18-7 TD to interception ratio following his 14-4. And then the fact is he was really good in just yards per pass. 200 attempts basically for over 2,000 yards is 10 yards an attempt. That's really solid. This is a guy who also can run, and he is very athletic. He is currently on the Colts, but he's listed as a QB wide receiver. They think he might be able to make the roster as wide receiver. The last quarterback to play in the UFL that would go on to be a QB receiver in an NFL team? That was Alex Magoo. So this is a guy whose skill set definitely has the potential to be really good. This is essentially the Showboat saying this is somebody who looks like a UFL QB. Now, of course, there are question marks about this selection. Case Cookus and T. Will, talent-wise, you could argue are better. Again, you can argue that. But the fact is that, while yes, in terms of, and objectively, they were 2 of the worst QBs in the league this past year, a lot of that was due to the god-awful offensive line that the Memphis Showboats had. So the question is the offensive line going to be good enough to actually make it to where if Bean decides to come to the league at some point, can he actually play behind it, or is he just going to be sacked, 40 times in a 10-game season? It's a very questionable thing, but the fact is Bean is somebody who talent-wise definitely can be a really good QB in the UFL. Be interesting to see what happened. That was their first overall pick. Now with their second-round pick, they selected running back Blake Watson. This is a pick I wasn't really too upset about. Look, Darius Victor was really the only running back that got significant time last year, and again, offensive line was a huge issue. Currently, Watson is on the Denver Broncos. He was a first-team All-AAC player this past year, after some of the AAC teams had left and all that, where he ran for 455 yards in just 5 games, had a 5.9 yards per rush, had 233 yards receiving, and then in 2022, of course, had a really solid year when he was able to play a full season, 900 yards rushing, 300 yards receiving, really, really solid player. I'm not really too upset about this pick. I think this was a solid pick. Again, they didn't really get much out of the running back position outside of a couple games from Victor. Yes, a lot of that was the offensive line. But even then, you can't really, if you were to go to an average person who watched like a couple UFL games, they couldn't tell you any other running back that played on that team. So getting somebody like Watson, if he were to come to the league, definitely going to be a good, solid player for them. Interesting to see. This is a guy who did rush for 1,000 yards in college before. So, we'll see, and he also is, he just played on Memphis, and, well, he's going to be the Showboats. Solid pick. Now, the next one is Evan Anderson, defensive line, mainly defensive tackle, from the Showboats. He is currently on the 49ers. This is a guy who played 39 games for Florida Atlantic. He registered 145 tackles, 20 TFLs, 7 sacks, 2 passes deflected, and 3 fumble recoveries. This is a guy who has received some honors, 3rd-team All-AAC, Conference USA, honorable mention honors and all that, 2nd-team All-CUSA. Solid career at FAU. Now, again, this is one of those where we start to see some questionable selections. Yes, their defense had a lot of issues, but we're now 3 picks in and they haven't addressed their 2 biggest needs in offensive line and defensive back, mainly corner. So, this is a pick where it's a solid player, but this is one of those where it's not really filling your must-need. You're filling a need, admittedly, but not a must-need, right? This is not where your biggest issue lies, so questionable, but a solid player nonetheless. Then we have Jalen Coker, wide receiver from Holy Cross. He is currently on the Carolina Panthers. This is somebody who was a first-team All-Patriot League twice, a second-team All-Patriot League once, a first-team FCS All-American, last year in 2023. He ended up having almost 3,000 yards receiving in his career, and he was a very, very just talented guy in a lot of, the numbers in a sense. He was able to run like a 1.52 second 10-yard split. He was able to have like a 42.5 inch vertical jump. Essentially, he was one of those guys that, you have the pro day combine guys. He was pretty much one of those guys. Very athletic guy. So this is somebody who has a lot of potential if he were to go to the Memphis Showboats. Though, again, we start with the things where it's a questionable pick solely in the sense of it's another receiver. Now, yes, we did see David Davis sign with the Carolina Panthers, so who knows, maybe they're doing this in a sense that they don't expect both guys to make it to the Panthers roster. Whichever one doesn't make it ends up either coming back in Davis's case or comes to in Coker's case. I think, again, this is a solid player, but this is not a pick that they needed. So, questionable. Again, not terrible, just not what you needed, so it's a very weird one. Then we have Eric Watts for their 5th round pick, defensive end out of UConn. For UConn, he was a solid player, ended up having 24 sacks across the 4 years. He was with the Jets, currently on their roster. This guy did have 10 sacks 1 year. UConn has been a football team, is the best way to describe it the past few years. Again, this is another selection on the wrong side of the line. You're getting the defensive line some help, which, again, yes, you want to bolster that D-line, which was really just not good. But, again, wasn't your weakest point on your roster. So it's a questionable decision to, continue stockpiling there. But, I mean, again, it's a solid player, just not really a solid position that you needed as much. But, yeah. And now we have probably what many would say is their best pick of the entire draft in Andrew Rame. This is a guy that was a really solid player for Oklahoma. Again, he was at one of those big schools. He was a second-team All-Big Ten twice, center. So you finally got some offensive line. And I would argue this might be their best pick of the entire draft. This is another Carolina Panther. Just seems that Memphis has something to do with Panthers, I guess. But yeah, this is a really solid pick. I think this was a great one. This is somebody who has potential to be a really solid player for this league. Again, this is somebody who was a really solid center in a big conference like the Big 12. Played at Oklahoma. Was a center that played a lot of games there naturally. That's how he was a second-team All-Big 12 twice. So this is somebody who, if he does come to the UFL, definitely can help that terrible offensive line really well. Center is very important on the offensive line. So this is a really solid pick. I think this is probably their best pick of the entire draft. And then their 7th round pick, they have Evandy Rigby, who came out of Temple, linebacker. He ended up having over 200 tackles in his career at Temple. He had, just over 4 sacks and 10 TFLs. In terms of this is a okay one. He's on Baltimore. If he ends up making the roster, that's a good sign for him being a really solid player in the future. Baltimore, their linebackers are just crazy. But I don't know if this was a great pick. Again, they are not. This is another one of those where it's like you could have used this pick for other guys that would help you in other areas on your roster instead of just picking a linebacker, which I would say most people wouldn't say is their biggest need at all. I think their D-line, which granted they drafted a couple, which is good, but mainly their DBs, and their O-line, of course. Very weird pick here. Not terrible, but pretty bad in the sense of what position you drafted and what you need. Now, their 3rd to last pick was Jaquan Shepard, cornerback out of Maryland. They finally decided to start shoring up that god-awful secondary. Now, Shepard was somebody that I watched a lot at Cincinnati. This is a very solid player. He was, with, Sauce and them, and Sauce, Kobe, and all them at, Cincinnati when they were making those runs as an AAC team. And then this past year, he went to Maryland. He was a first-team All-AAC back in 2022, along with Ivan Pace Jr., who now is a very, big mainstay in the Vikings. So, yes, we have seen UDFAs, from Cincinnati on that team become, really big stars. But overall, Shepard, this is a really good pick. This is, again, arguably their best pick. This or Rame is definitely their best pick of the draft. This is a really solid cornerback to get this late in the draft. This is somebody who, again, I've watched at Cincinnati. He was really good the 1 year they gave him a lot of time to actually play. He looked really good. This is a solid pick. I think this is definitely a really good one if he does come to the UFL. He is currently with the Raiders, so we'll see. But if he does go to the UFL and goes to the Showboats, that'll really help out the secondary. Now, their 2nd to last pick was McAllen Castles, tight end, Tennessee. This was a guy who was a really good player in the Big Sky Conference. He was a 2-time second team and 1-time first team. Now, in terms of what he did, in the Big Sky, his main 2 years were 21 and 22, where he had basically like 350 if you want to average it, 350, 360 receiving yards in 12 and 11 games. Really solid there. And then Tennessee is last year in college. He ended up having 280 yards receiving. This is a good tight end. It's just you have one and Sage Surratt, and I don't know. Again, this feels like you're drafting out of if you think he's a great player, not if he's in need. Again, having a backup that could be really good is a good thing, but questionable, solid player. I know a lot of people are really happy to see him get drafted, but I think there's other teams that could have drafted him, that actually would have used him more, but still a good player, just not the best pick, again, in position. And then lastly, they have another wide receiver they picked in Mason Tipton out of Yale. So already, yes, super smart guy. This is a guy who finished 3rd in school history in career touchdown receptions, 5th in receptions, 6th in receiving yards, 3-time All-Ivy selection, 1st-team All-Ivy, his last year there where he had 10 TDs. Really, really good player. Again, this is somebody who was at Yale, really smart player, currently on the New Orleans Saints. This is it's another really good player. It's just, again, why? And I think that, honestly, this pick basically sums up this whole draft for the Showboats the best, and that's why. Yes, really smart player. Really good player from where he played. But, I don't know. Overall, though, it's a solid pick, but time to look at my draft grade for them. The draft grade I'm giving them is a D. Look, you had 2 glaring weaknesses, an offensive line and your defensive backs. You drafted 2 total players for those positions. They are good players. But the one thing you got to also note, and I know we'll talk about it more when I get to them, but the Stallions drafted multiple offensive linemen after having one of, if not the best O-line in the league. You know why you draft multiple positions in an area of need, or multiple players in a position of need? It's because in this league, a lot of these guys will not ever play in the UFL. A lot of them will, but a lot of them won't. So essentially, if you only draft one center, you're banking on him not making an NFL roster and being able to play next year. Same with, the corner you drafted, getting Shepard. It's yes, you're getting a good player, but you're having to bank on him actually, failing in the NFL. Whereas if you draft 3 or 4 of a position, you're all but guaranteed that one of those guys surely will be playing for you in a year or 2. So the Showboats drafted positions like receiver twice, but they didn't really need to. So I think that overall, when you look at the Showboats draft, it was a pretty poor draft when you consider who they needed and everything. Definitely not the best. I think this is probably the worst, if not one of the worst drafts any team had, solely in an area of you didn't fix your issues at all or try to. You did a couple of minor things, and you drafted other areas you didn't really need for sure. You drafted a quarterback, but if your quarterback plays for you even as soon as next year, does it matter if your offensive line is still trash? So, again, I'm giving them a D. And with that, that'll do it for this one. This has been ZomFox. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. As I said, I'm probably going to be doing these twice a day in terms of the team draft recap, so be on the lookout for that, as later today I'll have the Houston Roughnecks draft recap come out. And again, we are doing a giveaway to 1,000 subscribers, so make sure you subscribe for that. And if you want to support the channel, think about becoming a community member. I do at least one video every month. And as always, guys, have a great night.